everybody. Welcome to Worst Case Macchiato, episode 14. And I'm having a crazy time with midterms right now. What's going on with you, Madison?
Not much. I just kicked out a hockey parent from a hockey game, so that's fun and exciting.
Oh, the joys.
Hockey parents are nuts.
I found that a lot of, softball parents, too, playing rep were, really crazy, too. So...
Yeah, especially, I called our boss for, hockey afterwards, and he didn't pick up, so I called, our, bigger boss, and I was like, yo, so this is my situation. He's like, cool, so the kid's not going to the NHL? Congratulations. I'm like, yeah,
oh my God.
the kid's, 9. I don't know, that age group is just brutal, man. Parents are ruthless.
It's so true. I find that especially, the parents of, male players, not to be, gender specific, but, I find that they're a lot more, intense with it than when with girls. Just in my opinion, in my experience.
Yeah. I mean, I don't even know if this, who her kid was or if she even had a kid on the team, but it was a girl. Chick that I threw out.
No, the parents can be a girl, it's fine. But, I find that, the mothers and fathers of, male athletes are a lot more crazy and, not barely even communicative, but just, they're more, vocal about things than, female athlete parents. In my experiences for it. Anyway.
Yeah, it really depends. I never really played a lot of female sports. I played a lot of boys hockey growing up until my last 2 years, and then we were at an age where we just wanted to have fun. So
yeah, I find that a lot with just with all the rep sports and female sport, female specific sports that I played. I find that the parents are more it's almost like they have the feminine attributes of being cliquey when it comes to sports
it definitely
and
was
stuff.
cliquey.
So
yeah.
Where guys teams there are cliques in guys teams, but usually they'll come together as a whole, where I find that female teams definitely don't do that. The parents will click the way that their kids are clicking, so it's just I find it's more petty and talking behind people's backs as opposed to yelling at the refs and whatever. Mm-hmm. So just before I jump into my case, I'm just doing a small PSA about the format of the podcast going forward. Madison and I have decided to split the episodes up into one case per episode going forward. We have found that the episodes have just feel like they've gotten so long. Each episode for the past few weeks has been well over an hour. Some of the recordings, especially the one that we recorded for this episode and going to be the next, the recording ended up being 2.5 hours. So due to these nature of the cases, we're going to do a lot more one case per episodes as opposed to multiple cases in one episode. There are some cases that we do want to cover that are small, that roughly take about half an hour each, or even less than that in some cases, but we feel like we want to talk about them because we find that they're really mind-boggling or interesting and we want to let people know about them. Those are the cases that will have more than one case per episode. They'll just be few and far in between as opposed to every week doing more than one case. If you did like the more than one case, even though that it was super long, just let us know. You can either let us know in our Gmail at worstcasemacchiato@gmail.com, or you can let us know by DMing us on Instagram or TikTok at worstcasemacchiato. And that's it for the PSA. I hope you enjoy the rest of the episode. But anywho, I kind of switched up the case that I was going to cover, just because you did say that you for that one case that you knew somebody who knew the guy, whatever, or was the neighbor of them. So, and obviously I didn't tell you ahead of time. So, I will cover that in the next few weeks, whatever, but I changed it. I changed it on the list already, so you don't have to change it on the list. But today, I'm going to talk about a terrorist attack in Norway that happened in 2011. On July 22nd, 2011, in Norway, around 3:30 p.m., a car bomb explosion in Oslo occurred in the executive government quarter of Norway. The bomb was placed inside a Volkswagen Crafter next to the building that housed the Prime Minister, Jens Stoltenberg, the Ministry of Justice, and the police, and there's several other ministry buildings as well that are in the area, but they weren't like the prime focus, so this included the Ministry of Petroleum and Energy, Ministry of Finance, Ministry of Education and Research, and the Supreme Court of Norway. The Volkswagen van was registered by surveillance cameras as entering the government buildings area just after 3:10 p.m., and the van stopped around 3:15. At this point, it stood still with its hazard lights on for a couple minutes before the driver drove the last 200 meters and parked the van in front of the main entrance of the main government building. The front door of the van opened 16 seconds later, and after another 16 seconds, the driver stepped out of the van, waited for 7 seconds before quickly walking away towards another parked car. The driver was dressed as a police officer and had a gun in his hand. A police helmet with a face shield was covering his face.
He was pretending to be a police officer?
Yeah, so he was dressed as a police officer in a fake uniform, carrying around a gun. The explosion started fires around the block, and the shockwave blew out the windows on all floors of many of the buildings, and the blast was caught on many security cameras. The streets in the area were filled with glass and debris, and the blast was heard for at least 7 kilometers each way of the explosion. The explosion ended up killing 8 people and injured at least 209, 12 of whom suffered from severe injuries. And then a witness called the police station at 3:34 p.m. to report a person in a police uniform holding a pistol in his hand entering an unmarked vehicle, which specifically was a Fiat Doblo. Information about this encounter, including the vehicle's license plate number and description of the suspect, was written on a notepad and hand-delivered to the police operations central, where it laid for 20 minutes before the witness was ever phoned back for more information. And the license plate number was not transmitted on the police radio for another 2 hours. So they were not very time efficient when it came to distributing this witness information.
Super side note, this just happened as I was on the ice, like not even 2 hours ago. There literally, I guess, came out a call here about a drive-by shooting here today. Like literally at like 6:30, 7 o'clock-ish.
Wow.
Yeah, like really close to where I went to school.
Oh my god.
And then it was quickly retracted, and it ended up being a mental health call and not a drive-by shooting as reported. So I don't know how it went from a drive-by shooting to a mental call, but anyways, sorry.
That's such a weird like change. Like you would have think that there would be like I could see if they were just like, oh, like false alarm, it wasn't like shots fired, it was just a car backfiring, then I'd be like, okay, like then I understand.
Or somebody is carrying a gun or has a gun but has not shot. Anyways,
yet again,
I don't know why that just popped into my head.
Something that I would assume, actually, which would make kind of sense, is if the car was like driving by and it was loud or whatever, and then somebody was screaming, they could have assumed that the car, like someone in the car shot at someone and they're screaming about it, but it could just be some, like, again, I met somebody with like a severe psychosis or, you know, a crack addict or something, like screaming about nothing, right? So like that's what I would assume at this point, obviously not knowing, but anyway, following the explosion, the area surrounding the damaged buildings was blocked off and evacuated. But fun fact, most of the transportation was still running in the city, obviously, because it's a big city. There's only so much you can do. The Oslo Metro remained operational. Most of the Oslo tram network continued running, except for the line that obviously went through the area that had the explosion. And all transit buses continued to run, except for one of the buses that was used on a route was actually taken off the route, and they were evacuating the wounded out of the area. But all in all, most of the transit continued going, just their schedules couldn't be as strict because of everything going on. A few roads that contained suspicious packages near tracks and roads were also shut down for caution, but none of these were actually confirmed to be bombs or anything like that. So it was just them being precautious. So less than 2 hours following the car bombing, the bomber, dressed in a homemade police uniform and having false identification, took a ferry to a nearby island, which is called Utoya, which is roughly about 30 to 40 kilometers away from Oslo, which is about 20 miles for the countries that convert things into miles. This island was hosting a summer camp organized by the AUF, which is a youth wing of the ruling Norwegian Labour Party. The summer camp ran there like every year. So this wasn't like it's an obscure place for that they're just randomly hosting it for a year. This was the same weeks every year, like whatever, right? So most of the children at this camp were the children of Oslo's politicians, and the camp is held, like I said, every year. And every year it was attended by approximately 600 teenagers. So like there was a lot of kids on this island. When the bomber arrived on the island, he presented himself as a police officer who had come over for a routine check following the bombing in Oslo. He was met by Monica Bosse, which is the camp leader and the person who kind of just, I guess she was like the hostess, that they called her the hostess of Utoya. She was believed to have gotten suspicious of the bomber and attempted to contact Trond Berntsen, which is the security officer of the island, before the bomber ended up shooting them both in the head. The attacker signaled and asked people to gather around him before pulling weapons out and firing indiscriminately, killing and wounding numerous staff members and teenagers. He first shot people on the island, and he later started shooting people who were trying to escape by swimming across the lake surrounding the island.
Wait, he just started shooting people, and nobody was like...
Mm-hmm.
Nobody tried to stop him?
He shot the main security guard, and he was dressed as a police officer, and he was telling people to gather because he's like basically just doing a routine check to make sure that everyone's okay and blah blah blah. And when they're all like gathered, he just pulls out a semi-automatic rifle and just starts open firing on this group of people. Yeah. One of the survivors, Dana Barzingi, she was 21 years old at the time, described that many of the victims that were wounded by the gunman pretended to be dead. For some of them, it didn't work, and he circled back and shot them again to make sure that they were dead. The gunman was said to spare an 11-year-old boy who lost his father, which was the security guard, Trond Berntsen. This 11-year-old stood up against him and said that he was way too young to die, and he was spared. The gunman also spared a 22-year-old man who begged for his life. So, I don't know why he specifically spared these specific people, but he did. So, the mass shooting lasted for around an hour and a half. So he was firing on people for an hour and a half, only ending when a police special task force called Delta arrived, and the gunman, known as Anders Breivik, surrendered at 6:35 p.m. despite having a lot of ammunition left. So Breivik used hollow point or frangible bullets, which increased tissue damage. And during the shooting, Breivik repeatedly shouted, "You will die today, Marxist liberals, members of the elite." Yeah.
Interesting.
Bosse's husband and one of their daughters were also present on Utoya. They both survived. The youngest victim was New Zealand-born Sheridan Sveg-Bon, who was only 14 years old. And 16-year-old Andren Bakken Aspeland was the last victim, who was shot and killed 1 hour after the shooting began. Residents on the mainland sailed out to rescue many survivors using their motorboats and fishing dinghies. Victims were pulled out shivering and bleeding from the water. Some were picked up from hiding places in the bushes, behind rocks, around the island shoreline. Many victims survived by pretending to be dead. Several campers, especially those who knew the island well, swam to the rocky side of the island and hid in the caves that were only accessible through the water. And 47 of the campers sought refuge in the Skolestua, which is the schoolhouse that's on the island. And they were there with personnel from the Norwegian People's Aid. And Breivik actually fired 2 bullets through the door, but he never actually got through the locked door, and everyone in the building survived. The former Prime Minister, Gro Harlem Brundtland,
Quite the name.
Yeah, whom Breivik said he hated, had been on Utoya earlier that day to give a speech to the camp, and Breivik stated during the trial that he originally wanted to target her specifically, but because of all the delays related to the renovation of the Oslo Central Railway Station, he arrived after she had already left. So, the first shot on the island was actually fired around 5:22 p.m., and the emergency medical services were informed about the shooting 2 minutes after the first shot. 1 minute after that, the police in Oslo were informed. The police tried to reach Utoya as quickly as possible, but they did not have a helicopter that could take them straight to the island. So they had to drive from downtown Oslo, where there was so much traffic and people running around due to the bombing. And it took them a really long time. It took them... they had to leave Oslo and drive there by car to the shoreline, and then they had to get into a boat on the shoreline to go onto the island. So it took a lot longer than they would have anticipated. One of the first group of rescuers to arrive on the scene was Marcel Gleffe, a German resident staying at Utvika camping on the mainland. He heard gunshots and decided to pilot his boat to the island, and he began throwing life jackets to a lot of the young kids in the water, rescuing as many as he could, taking 4 or 5 trips, after which the police asked him to stop going back out just for his own safety. And the Daily Telegraph actually credited him with saving up to 30 lives. Another 40 were saved by Hege Dalen and Toril Hansen, a married couple on vacation in the area. Dalen was helping from land, while Hansen and a neighbor camper made several trips to rescue people in the water. Several dozen more were rescued by Kasper Iljog, a local resident who made 3 trips to the island after receiving a phone call that something terrible was happening on Utoya and that they were requesting help. Altogether, all of these efforts by residents and vacationers saved about 150 victims who swam away from the island. So, the police weren't organizing anything, they just did it all out of good conscience. Which is amazing, honestly. They saved
That's huge.
A huge amount, almost 1/3 of them they saved. The police unit, which, as I said earlier, is called Delta, they reached the ferry meeting point at 6:09 p.m., about 40 minutes after the first shot, and they had to wait another 5 minutes before they could even get a boat to take them across, and they finally reached Utoya just before 6:30 p.m. So it took them an hour to get on the island.
That's insane. That's way too long. It should not take that long. There should be better measures in place.
Yeah, and they were highly criticized for how slow their response time was.
Yeah, I don't doubt that at all.
And also, it took 2 hours for an
not
APB
acceptable.
on the car that a fake police officer was getting into. It took 2 hours for that to go out.
Yeah, there's a massive case that I'm going to be covering that involves kind of something similar, except for it took almost the entirety of the duration of the crime before they put out be on the lookout. And it's a recent crime too.
Yeah,
which is why
this one was 12 years ago. This one was not that long ago. You would think that it would be a lot better.
The one I'm talking about happened during COVID.
Wow, yeah, that is very recent.
It's on our list.
Okay, cool. I'm excited to hear that then, because that is ridiculous. Like,
It's a full solo.
nice.
And I'm so passionate about that case.
Nice. Okay, I'm definitely excited to hear about that. So when the police finally got on the island, they confronted Breivik, who initially hesitated for a few seconds, but an officer yelled, "Surrender or be shot." So Breivik laid down his weapons and surrendered. Breivik reportedly called the Norway emergency phone number at least twice during the shootings. He called at 6:01 and 6:26 p.m., claiming that he wanted to surrender, but then continued to kill people in between his phone calls. So it's still unknown, like, why he was doing that. And I'll explain a little bit later on why it doesn't make any sense. But it is recorded saying that he did call twice. But apparently Breivik hung up both times that he called, and he declined their calls back when they tried to reach him again. When the police arrived on the scene, the survivors actually begged the officers to throw away their weapons because they were afraid that they would open fire on them as well. Because at this point, they don't know that Breivik isn't a police officer. Like, they know that he's shooting at them, but they don't know how many other people are dressing up as police officers coming, you know?
Yeah.
Any survivor at that point, like, I can't imagine the amount of the survivors that have PTSD from seeing a police officer, like, with a gun around them, right? Like, it would be terrifying.
Yeah.
But during the attack, 69 people were killed on the island, and of the 517 survivors, 66 were severely wounded. Of the 69 who died, 57 were killed by one or more shots through the head. So his shot was very accurate. 67 of the 69 were killed by gunshots. One died from falling off a cliff trying to escape, and one drowned, dying to swim away from the island. And in total, Breivik fired at least 186 shots on the island and still had a considerable amount of ammunition left. In addition to arresting Breivik, the police also arrested Anzor Jukayev, a 17-year-old boy. Upon arrest, he was stripped naked and locked up in a jail cell only meters away from the cell housing the self-confessed gunman. He was suspected as being an accomplice because his haircut was different from what was shown on his identity document, so they believed that it was fake. And he also did not react in the same degree as the other survivors. And he didn't cry, he didn't act hysterically. The police officer said that he didn't even look scared. But it actually turned out that he also witnessed another serious event prior to this, so it was almost like he was like almost accustomed to the scare, I guess. He was kept in custody for 17 hours before being released, and his lawyer, Harold Stabel, criticized the police for failing to contact the boy's family and for interrogating him without a lawyer or his parents present. So this guy was completely innocent. He was a survivor, and they like treated him horribly, you know?
That's awful.
Like, yeah, and they didn't contact the family at all. Not to like, they didn't like call to see, like, to confirm or unconfirm this guy's identity, nothing. They just assumed, oh, his hair is different than his identity card, like, and just arrested him. Like, that's terrifying. So now he actually went through a decent bit of preparation for the attack, so I kind of wanted to talk about that a little bit. So Breivik claims to have started planning these attacks in 2002, so 9 years before the attacks actually occurred. He was said to have started preparing for the attacks as early as 2009. Some 2 years before the attacks, though, he concealed his violent intentions from everyone he knew. So even though he was planning it for 9 years, he was physically getting all the guns, the ammunition, and everything like that within the last 2 years before the bomb and the shootings. So Breivik spent 6 days in Prague in late August to early September 2010. Breivik noted that Prague is known for maybe being the most important transit site point for illicit drugs and weapons in Europe. So when he was in Prague, he hollowed out the rear seats of his Hyundai Atos in order to have space for the firearms he hoped to buy. He said that he wanted to buy an AK-47 type assault rifle, a Glock pistol, 2 hand grenades, and a rocket-propelled grenade. And he said that the latter two, so both of the 2 types of grenades, he stated would be a quote-unquote bonus if he could get them. Contrary to his expectations, he was actually unable to purchase any firearms in Prague, and he noted that it was the first major setback in his entire plan, and that it was nothing like what the BBC posted, as it was actually safer than he actually thought it was, and it was not an ideal city for gun purchasing. So he was not able to buy any of the guns there. Breivik had several fake police badges printed to wear with a police uniform, all of which he had acquired illegally on the internet. Thank you, internet. Since his plan to purchase guns in Prague disappointingly failed, he decided to procure his weapons through legal channels in Norway. He decided to obtain a semi-automatic rifle and a Glock pistol legally in Norway, which at this point, he claimed to have a quote-unquote clean criminal record, hunting license, and 2 guns, which he noted was a Benelli Nova 12-gauge pump-action shotgun and a Weatherby Vanguard 308 bolt-action rifle, which he claimed to have had for 7 years, which was false. Breivik obtained a legal permit for a 223 caliber Ruger Mini 14 semi-automatic carbine, which he bought in late 2010 for 1,400 euros. But he found that getting a permit for the pistol proved way more difficult than he anticipated, as he had to actually go to he had to regularly attend a sports shooting club to show that he could use it safely. So from November 2010 to January 2011, he went through 15 training sessions at Oslo Pistol Club, and by mid-January, his application to purchase a Glock pistol was finally approved. And Breivik claimed that he bought 300 grams of sodium nitrate from a Polish shop for 10 euros, which led him to being placed on the watch list for the Norwegian intelligence. Which, this is another thing that was highly criticized, because the Norwegian intelligence did not act even though he was placed onto their list, because they believed that his actions were irrelevant to their terror concerns. So apparently anybody in Oslo at this time could have bought 300 grams of sodium nitrate, which is a super key ingredient for bomb making, and the Norwegian intelligence didn't care. Which, between that and the response times, their justice system is not doing great.
Yeah, it's I thought Canada's was bad, but I think we're doing a little better than that.
Yeah. So there is something in his planning that this one, the gun thing, he knew a way around it, but this is something that just proved that he was so intent on doing this, and that he was he actually knew what he was doing, in my opinion, because on May 18th in 2009, Breivik created a sole proprietorship called Breivik Geofarm, a company established under the fictitious purpose of cultivating vegetables, melons, roots, etc. And the whole purpose of this fake company was to gain access to chemicals and materials, especially fertilizer, that can be used for the production of explosives without arousing suspicion. So on May 4th, 2011, Breivik purchased 6 tons, which is 13,000 pounds of fertilizer, 3 tons, or 6,600 pounds of ammonium nitrate, and 3 tons, or 6,600 pounds of calcium ammonium nitrate.
Who the heck lets someone buy that much of all those things?
Yep. So
how is that not a red flag?
So people obviously...
It's not a flag, but it's red.
Yeah, literally. So people obviously highly question government officials about how a single individual would be able to buy so many materials to craft bombs, and became highly critical about the laws surrounding it. But there is no legislation to keep agricultural businesses from buying as much fertilizer as they like. Therefore, there was nothing suspicious about Breivik's purchase. So, and as far as I know, from the research I did, this this is still the way that it is. Like, they can still buy the amount of fertilizer that they want. I don't know if that's actually accurate, but just as far as I could tell, like, this has not changed. So
it's wild.
Yeah, the police and bomb experts reconstructed the bomb, and with the amount of materials that Breivik had used, the bomb had weighed 950 kilograms or 2,090 pounds. Which people were also kind of like suspicious about if he was truly acting alone or with somebody else, because how could he lift 950 kilograms to put it into the truck, and stuff like that? But like, it's also, he could have just built it in the truck, you know, like,
yeah.
So it's like here or there, really. So in April 2011. Breivik reported moving from Oslo to Valstua, in which this farming address gave him the ability to purchase the ingredients for his explosives. So it wasn't like he was living in the major city of Oslo in an apartment. He was living in a farming city, like on a farm. So him buying a whole bunch of farming materials, seeing as he just started a quote-unquote farming company, it's not that suspicious, right? Like, doesn't seem to be suspicious. After the making of the bomb that he used, he had between 1,000 and 1,500 kilograms, so anywhere between 2,200 and 3,300 pounds left of additional material that he could have used for making a second bomb. So he had enough materials to make more than one. So
he could have made thousands, honestly.
Yeah, so in addition to the 15 training sessions at the shooting range that he had to attend to get his gun permits, he visited countries with relaxed gun laws so he could sharpen his skills. And Breivik also said that he made use of the video game Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2 as a training aid, while using World of Warcraft as a cover for his extended period of isolation. And he also said that he honed his shooting skills using an in-game holographic sight similar to the one that he actually used during the attacks. So, who is Anders Breivik? Anders Behring Breivik was born on February 13th, 1979. He's an Aquarius. In Oslo, to Jens David Breivik, who was a civil economist who worked as a diplomat for the Norwegian embassy in London and later Paris. So, I mean, ironic. And Wenche Elizabeth, or Venchi? I'm not sure with, like, Norway if they use the W as, like, a W or a B. I assume V, but I don't know. Elizabeth Behring, and his mom was a nurse. Anders had a maternal half-sister named Elizabeth, and 3 paternal half-siblings named Eric, Jan, and Nina. He spent the first year of his life in London, since his dad was working in London at the time, until his parents got divorced and his mother took him back to Oslo with her. When Breivik was only 4 years old, 2 reports were filed expressing concern about his mental health. At only 4 years old, imagine. A psychologist in one report made note of his peculiar smile, suggesting that it wasn't anchored in his emotions, but it was actually a deliberate response to his environment. So it's like he knew that he was supposed to be smiling at something or something that somebody says, but he wasn't feeling it. So it wasn't like a sincere smile. And then also Norway's National Center for Child and Adolescent Psychiatry, which is known as the SSBU, reported concerns that Breivik's mother sexualized him, hit him, and frequently told him that she wished that he was dead.
Jesus.
Yeah,
That's
so
quite the way to grow up.
Yeah, so his mother was described in many reports as a woman with an extremely difficult upbringing. She had borderline personality disorder and an all-encompassing, if hardly visible, depression. This report highly recommended that Breivik should be forcibly removed from his mother and placed into foster care, as she was extremely emotionally and psychologically abusive, but this was not carried out by the Child Welfare Service, so they just neglected the situation. Even before he was born, Breivik's mother developed a hatred for her son, claiming that he was a quote-unquote nasty child, and that he was kicking her on purpose, as children in utero do. She supposedly wanted to abort him, but by the time she went to the hospital, she had passed the 3-month threshold for an abortion. Therefore, it was no longer legal for her to abort him. Psychologist reports later stated that she thought that he was fundamentally nasty and evil and that he was determined to destroy her. She also noted that she stopped breastfeeding him very early on because he was, quote-unquote, sucking the life out of her. So, like, this is just very clearly a very mentally disturbed woman who was not ready to be a mother. Yeah. Right? Like, she... Actually, I didn't put it in my notes, but I remember when I was doing my research, she was like 16 or 17 years old when she left her parents' house, and a few years later, she was pregnant with Anders. So, like, she was like barely legal, right? Like, she was like just freshly not a minor when she was giving birth to him, so she definitely was not ready. Upon the divorce, when she moved back to Oslo, their neighbors claimed that that there was fights at the apartment regularly, and that she often left the children completely alone for extended periods of time with no caretaker, no, like, babysitter or anything like that. She's also a nurse, so it's, like, long periods of time. Like, it's, like, 12, 14 hours a time. And that's when he was, at the youngest, 1. Right? Like, that's a really long time. Yeah. Yeah. So, in February 1983, upon advice from her neighbors, Breivik's mother sought help from the National Center for Child and Adolescent Psychiatry, who concluded that he had to be removed from his mother for him to develop normally. This decision was based on several observations. They first said that he had little emotional engagement and did not show joy or cry when he was hurt, and this is actually a psychopathic trait. So, like, for him to basically remedy this psychopathic trait, he would have to be in a situation far from his mother. And then another point that they made was he made no attempts to play with other children, which is another trait of psychopathy, but, like, a lot of, like, serial killers, mass shooters, and everything like that have antisocial disorder. So, like, I also noted that as well. And he also had obsessive compulsive disorder. He was extremely clean and became anxious when his toys were not in order. And they believe that this was because she constantly told him that he was dirty, he was bad, and he has to, like, tidy up after himself and stuff like that, even if he was, like, 4 or 5 years old. So he just constantly developed that anxiety about, if it's not right, I'm going to be abused in some sort of situation. So the psychiatrist in 1983 stated, and I quote, "Anders is a victim of his mother's projections of paranoid, aggressive, and sexual fears towards men in general, and she projects onto him her own primitive, aggressive, and sexual fantasies, all the qualities in men that she regards as dangerous and aggressive." And regardless of this assessment, and the psychiatrists highly recommending that he be taken out of his mother's care, again, child welfare services did not follow the recommendation, and instead only placed him in respite care during the weekends, which means that he just wasn't home for the weekends. He was in another house with a random couple that he doesn't know. So when Breivik's father learned of the situation going on with Anders, he filed for full custody. However, Breivik's mother, in retaliation, also filed to get full custody back. And in 1984, a hearing in front of the Municipal Child Welfare Committee took on whether Breivik's mother should lose custody of him altogether. But the Child Welfare Services lost this case due to who they had to represent them in court. The agency was represented by a social worker with no prior experience of representing a case in front of a committee. And it was ruled that the family should just be supervised, but after only 3 visits, the supervision was discontinued, and Anders was never again put into respite or foster care. So they basically just said, fuck you. So at school, though, his former classmates recalled Anders as being an extremely intelligent student, and he was actually stronger than most others his age, and apparently he often took care of people who were bullied, which is very interesting. And despite his high intelligence and protective behavior, he was described as being extremely rebellious. He was a prolific graffiti artist and was caught by the police on several occasions, in which he was fined on 2 occasions. Breivik's mother noted that after being caught and fined for spraying graffiti on walls in 1995, when Breivik was only 15, his father ceased contact with him, but according to Breivik's father, it was actually Anders who broke off contact, and Anders also broke off contact with his best friend at the time. It was said that Breivik spent most of his spare time as a minor weight training, and he started to use anabolic steroids. He cared a lot about his looks and about appearing big and strong. Also around this time, there was a mandatory conscription for military service in the Norwegian army, but Breivik was exempt from it due to the Norwegian Defense Security Department deeming that he was unfit for service. And at age 21, he worked in the customer service department of an unnamed company, working with people from all countries and all walks of life. And apparently he was kind to everyone, and he was an exceptional colleague, but a close friend of his said that he actually had a very big ego, which, by the way, is another trait of psychopathy. In between working with this company and the attacks, he traveled extensively and visited up to 24 different countries in the years prior to the attacks. Breivik wrote and emailed about a manifesto, and it was like 1,500 pages.
Jesus.
The longest manifesto I have ever heard of in my life. And it was titled...
Same.
Yeah, it was titled 2083, A European Declaration of Independence. And the major theme of this manifesto is the argument that multiculturalism has weakened national identity, and he encouraged Islamist extremism. So he was just extremely racist, extremely right-wing, didn't like multiculturalism, and believed that the country was like going backwards. Following his arrest on the island, Breivik underwent examination by court-appointed forensic psychiatrists who diagnosed him with paranoid schizophrenia. They concluded that he had been psychotic at the time of the attacks and that he was criminally insane. There was extreme criticism of this report, so a second evaluation was approved by the court, and the second evaluation reported that he actually was sane, and this report was done in April 2012. So ultimately, the verdict and the ruling of the court's 5-judge panel agreed that Breivik was sane and was fit for trial. There was suspicion that there were accomplices, and the police initially prepared to meet a group of 2 to 5 shooters when they arrived on Utoya, which clearly was not the case. Many of the victims and witnesses also claimed to have seen another shooter, though, multiple describing him as a tall, dark-haired man who did not wear a police uniform. When he was arrested, Breivik also claimed that he acted with accomplices, but then later changed his statements when he got to the police station, saying that he was acting alone. So, very suspicious, which, I mean, any of these, like, major extremists that will write a manifesto and commit these crimes, a lot of them are a part of groups or at least have at least one other person that also believes these things with them. Like, just from what, like, I know about these kind of groups, right? So, on July 24th in 2011, 6 people were arrested in Oslo, suspected of having connections with the attacks, but all were released due to lack of evidence. And the police later gave a statement saying that they only found evidence of one shooter at Utoya. But a lot of the victims and witnesses saying that, like, some of them, like, this accomplice was shooting from the mainland. So, like, it's like, I don't really, if they were just looking on the Utoya, like, island, it's hard to say if, like, they would be able to find evidence, you know? So, in the initial hours after the attacks, the group Ansar al-Jihad al-Alami, which is the Helpers of the Global Jihad, led by Abu Sulaiman al-Nasser. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right, and I'm sorry for anyone who actually speaks those kind of languages. I'm really sorry. But this group claimed responsibility for the attacks, but there was no proof to say whether or not it was actually their involvement or not. So, following his arrest, Breivik had specifically requested that Geir Lipstad became his attorney, so he knew exactly which attorney he wanted. To Geir Lipstad's surprise, he was actually, the way that they depicted it in the movie that I watched, he was not excited to take on the case, because he knew that it was a big case, and of course, you're trying to defend somebody who just shot up a whole bunch of people and is admittingly doing it. So, It was an uphill battle for him already, but he did take on the case. On July 25th, 2011, Breivik was arraigned in Oslo District Court. The police feared that Breivik would use the hearing as an opportunity to communicate with the possible accomplices, and because of this, the arraignment was held completely closed to the media and all other spectators. Judge Kim Heger held a press conference shortly afterwards where he read the court's decision. And at this time, completely closed court hearings was extremely rare in the Norwegian justice system, so it just showed how, precautious they were being in terms of this case. Although many police and their attorneys wanted high treason charges or charges for crimes against humanity, the prosecution ended up indicting Breivik on terrorism charges. Breivik admitted to being the gunman at Utoya and the one behind the Oslo bomb, but he also pleaded not guilty, stating that he does not want to recognize the Norwegian justice system. District Attorney Christian Hatlo asked that Breivik be detained for 8 weeks without mail or visitation, and the judge actually ruled in favor of the prosecution, stating the accused is an imminent danger to society and must be confined for the safety of himself and others. It is highly probable that he is guilty of the alleged crimes, and imprisonment is necessary to prevent destruction of evidence. After the 8 weeks detention without mail or visitation, on September 19th, 2011, he would transfer to the Isle Landsfengsel, which is a maximum security prison. On August 13, 2011, Breivik was taken back to Utoya by police to recreate his actions on the day of the massacre. Neither the media nor the public was actually alerted of this operation, but the police explained that the walkthrough was absolutely necessary because he was going to be charged and tried for all 77 murders individually, and the police thought it would be less offensive to the survivors to do it before the trial than having to listen to him say it in the trial. On the evening of August 14th, the police held a press conference about the reconstruction, and they reported that Breivik was completely unmoved by his return to Utoya and that he showed no remorse. The trial began on April 16th, 2012, and lasted for 2 months, until it finally ended on June 19th, 2012. 170 media organizations were accredited to cover the proceedings. Breivik acknowledged that he committed the offenses but pleaded not guilty, as I said, because he believed the killings were of necessity. It was important for Breivik that he was not to be deemed insane or psychotic because he believed that it would lose the meaning of his message entirely. And on August 24th, Breivik was found to be sane by the panel of 5 judges, and he was sentenced to preventative detention, a sentence of 21 years in prison, which can be repeatedly extended by 5 years as long as he's considered a threat to society. So this is the only way, by Norwegian law, that they can get life imprisonment, because they don't, this is the maximum sentence that their law allows. So there's no such thing as life imprisonment unless they give this specific ruling, and they have to evaluate every 5 years to see if he's still a threat. So it's likely that he will never leave, because he's still there to this day, obviously, because he hasn't even filled out the 21 years yet, but yeah, every 5 years after the 21 years, they have to reevaluate. And based on the fact that he wrote a 1,500-page manifesto, I highly doubt that he'll be getting out after the 21 years. So Norway changed in multiple different ways, obviously following this attack. They changed, obviously, their response times, the necessity for doing things in a quicker manner. A lot of people who were in executive positions resigned due to the lack of respect that they felt that they got. And this was actually the biggest attack that Norway has said that they had since World War II. So, it was almost like, it reminds me of Columbine for the United States, where that one event that ruins everything, and it just makes you more it just makes you change your policies and more aware of it. So yeah, they changed in that way. So Coop Norway, which is a chain of retail stores in Norway, removed several games from its shelves as a result of the attack. Some of the games included Homefront, Call of Duty, any of the Call of Duty games, Sniper Ghost Warrior, Counter-Strike Source, World of Warcraft, any of these games that are violent and first-person shooter kind of deal.
Yeah.
which, like, as far as I know, like, it didn't say that they were taken out or like put back onto the shelves, but they were all taken off, and there was actually a couple of them were only temporarily removed, which was like games considered as like on rail shooter games. So I don't know precisely which ones are pulled and which ones weren't, but obviously Call of Duty and World of Warcraft, because that's what he said that he used to train, so makes sense there. In the days following the attacks, Norway's political parties actually noted a significant increase in the interest for membership from many young people in the country. The conservative parties and progressive parties had signed almost 1,000 new members each by early August, so less than a month after the attacks. And the Labour Party, which was the party that was in power at the time, reported over 6,000 new members at the end of the month. On February 28, 2018, Peter Lorlik of the Norwegian Parliament's Committee on Judicial Affairs said a proposal to ban semi-automatic weapons proposed the year prior had official, like, so they were already in, like, they already proposed a ban of semi-automatic weapons before the attack, and they finally got the support in 2018 for it to become a law, and it became a law in 2021, which was still ridiculous. But the law banned the Ruger Mini 14 rifle specifically because it was used in the Utoya massacre. And then they also banned semi-automatic rifles for hunting. However, semi-automatic firearms for shooting sports is still legal for sportsmen who have permission for practice and competition shooting from Dynamic Sports Shooting Norway, the DSSN, and the Norwegian Reserve Officers Association, obviously, they're police. There have been a series of incidents that were claimed to be potential copycats. I wrote down like huge descriptions for them, but I'm just kind of like basically breezed through them here. On August 10, 2012, a 29-year-old man from the Czech Republic said that he was an admirer of Breivik. He was stockpiling a whole bunch of weapons and bombs and stuff, and then he was arrested. He was found to be criminally insane, was put into a psychiatric detention center, and it turned out that even though he was a Breivik sympathizer, he wasn't actually planning a terrorist attack. He suffered from paranoia and was stockpiling weapons for self-defense. On November 20, 2012, Polish authorities announced the arrest of 45-year-old chemical and engineering professor Brunon Kuyken, who was an admirer of Breivik as well, but he was also inspired by the Oklahoma City bombing, and he was quoted by investigators to have said, and I quote, "Breivik and McVeigh made mistakes, I will be better." So this guy was very clearly ready to hurt a whole bunch of people. He conducted an experimental bomb in the Polish countryside, which he actually filmed, and he also recruited 4 other people for his cause, but he said that he was going to be smarter, but clearly he wasn't, because 2 of the 4 were actually secret agents. And he was convicted and sentenced to 9 years imprisonment on April 19, 2017, which was cut short when he died in prison on August 6, 2019, from a supposed suicide. Debatable. And then the last one is Brenton Harrison Tarrant, who was arrested following the mass shootings that took place at the Al-Noor Mosque in the Linwood Islamic Center during Friday prayer on March 15, 2019, in Christchurch, New Zealand, in which he killed 51 people and injured 40 others. Tarrant wrote his own manifesto, titled The Great Replacement, in which he stated that he was particularly inspired by Breivik and claimed to have been in brief contact with him, as well as he met with his organization, the Knights Templar. So there was also 4 different movies that have been released regarding the shooting and the massacre that took place. So the first one was Til Ungdommen, which is in English is transferred to the Youth, which was released in 2012, and that was directed by Mary Ann Moe. Utoya, July 22nd, was released in 2018, directed by Eric Popp. 22 July, also released in 2018 on Netflix, was directed by Paul Greengrass. This is the movie that I watched. And then the last one actually came out in 2021, was directed by Tommy Gillickson, and it was called Arvin Etter 22 July, which is the legacy of the 22nd of July. So the movie that I watched Like, it started with like the Anders Breivik view, where he was like getting dressed. He drove the van to the government buildings, parked it, left, went to the island, shot the security guard and the girl who was running the camp and stuff, and he started open firing. And then after he was arrested and stuff, it followed from the view of two of the survivors, Villar and his brother. I didn't write his brother's name down, but it mostly centered around Villar Hansen, who was shot 5 times by Anders, some being in the skull, some of them being in the back. And he woke up from a coma 6 days later with life-changing injuries. He lost an eye, he suffered severe impairment of motor functions, and he had to relearn how to walk. He actually talked in court as a witness, and he delivered an account of the massacre on the stand, which he was one of the only victims to have done it. Villar and his family, in real life, moved to the Tromsø area and is now a member of the Norwegian Municipal Council, so he actually went into politics, which I find really like, I always love when I'm doing a story and the survivors go into something related to their crime and stuff, because it just like, I'm not like glad that there's like people who've experienced it in the field, but I'm glad that like they can relate to people in terms of it.
Yeah, and it kind of makes people feel more comfortable that they're not alone, and that, you know, they have someone to kind of...
Yeah, and they know that like these policymakers or like these people are gonna fight for them in their corner. Like, I can only imagine how much that Villar has probably done, like, in the council that he works for, to deal with like all these response times. Like, I can't even imagine. And just the last thing before I end my case is, fun fact, the actor who played Anders Behring Breivik in the movie on Netflix, his first name was also Anders, but he is Anders Danielson Lee. So I found it really, really funny that they have the same first name. But that is it for my case. It actually was a lot. I was like, this case isn't going to take me that long. And then I went into the whole backstory of Breivik, and I'm like, oh my god, this is like... Because like the movie doesn't go into like all of the abuse and stuff that Breivik actually like went through as a child, but I think it's very important to note, just because like a lot of the killers and serial killers and mass shooters and stuff like that, and bombers and stuff, a lot of them have horrible childhoods. So some of them have decent childhoods, but like most of them are really, really bad. So like just imagine what could have happened if he stayed with his father instead of living with his mother in Oslo.
Yeah,
like it could have been night and day, because he was said to be extremely intelligent. He was artistic. He loved street art, you know, like, and he was like protective of the kids at school who were bullied. And then just him being in a constantly abusive household and knowing that the government didn't give a shit about him as a child. It's not like I understand, but like it makes sense on why he didn't like the government.
Yeah, no, that totally makes sense.
Thank you so much for listening to episode 14. Please give us a follow on Spotify, give us a rating on Apple Podcasts, everything like that. You can always get in contact with us to tell us about other cases, tell us about, like I said at the beginning in the PSA, to tell us about the format if you would prefer to see more longer episodes where two of us have a case, or if you're okay with the shorter, under an hour cases, just let us know. And you can get in contact with us through our Gmail at worstcasemacchiato@gmail.com, or you can DM us on one of our social media platforms, Instagram or TikTok, at worstcasemacchiato. And like always, we'll see you in the next one. Bye!